Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, page 200. Curiously, even those who follow the values set forth in religious texts would not use those texts as a guide for how to build a television set or an assault rifle. Those who fight in religious wars are quite willing to use the science embodied in jet planes, radar, and other weaponry to defeat their infidel enemies. Yet, they are not willing to use the methods of science to examine the basis for their own beliefs and values. If the methods of science were applied to studying human values, we might hope someday to find values that were at least reasonably, if never completely, objective. Common values. We share many basic values with all other human beings because of our common psychological, social, and physiological needs. Physiological, social, and psychological needs. The commonality should be able to provide a basis for a shared set of values that would support us all in living together harmoniously. Yet, despite this common basis for values, people growing up in different cultures often have quite different values, and this can become a basis for conflict between people, both as individuals and as members of groups. Even a very basic need like hunger can be satisfied in a wide variety of ways, and the cooking of one culture may not appeal at all to someone brought up in another. Whenever people differ in their values, there is a potential for conflict. At the simplest level, if I want to eat Chinese food and my wife wants Italian, we either have to find a restaurant that can satisfy both of us or search for an alternate kind of food that we both like. When different values are more divergent or more important, the potential for solutions decreases dramatically, and the potential for conflict increases in the same measure. For instance, if I want to have several wives and live in a fortified compound defended by servants, and my wife wants a monogamous household in suburbia, it will be much more difficult for us to find a mutually acceptable solution. That may seem like a ridiculous example, but if a woman from suburban marries an Arab prince, it becomes very real indeed. Most societies have traditionally tried to solve the problem of conflicting values by some kind of authoritarian decision about what values everyone should have, usually describing them as right and proper, obviously true, or divinely ordained. This uniform set of values pervades all aspects of a traditional culture, specifying how every act should be done in accord with these established values. If the culture is isolated, every person in it typically accepts these values without even thinking about them, because they have no other options to consider. When inevitably some members of a group find the traditional values to be a burden, they have to be punished or exiled to maintain stability. When a culture like this contacts as a neighboring one with different values, each typically views the others as ungodly heathens who have to either be converted into believers or converted into corpses. Since anyone who believes differently is a threat to the culture's values, a traditional society is a lot like the monoculture or of a modern wheat farm or apple orchard. Only wheat or apple trees are tolerated. All other plants are weeds to be exterminated. A natural ecosystem is very different. Even though all the plants have common needs for air, water, and soil nutrients, different plants do better in different locations. Some live best in bright sun and deep damp soil, along streams and rivers, while others do well in the deep shade of the tropical jungle or on dry, rocky desert ridges, etc. This parallel suggests a possible alternative to totalitarian uniformity, a society in which people with many different values could live differently, yet comfortably with each other despite their differences. Modern Western society is somewhere between these two possibilities, having emerged from more uniform traditional societies. There are still many totalitarian forces trying to maintain or re-establish uniformity in beliefs and values, even in such totally arbitrary customs as the kind of clothing worn or music played. Even in such totally arbitrary customs as the kind of cloth worn or music played. On the other hand, there is much more tolerance of different ways of living, at least some space for people who want to follow different cultural norms, or even try out inventing some of their own. For centuries, traditional critics have often predicted that the change would result in anarchy and disorganization, but they have seldom or never been correct. In Western societies, many different people value wildly different things and activities, without necessarily coming into conflict. Think of all the differences between that you and someone else values, even within your own culture or subculture. When I examine the things and activities that many others value, some of them make no sense to me at all. Someone would have to pay me a lot of money to do things that others eagerly spend time and money to do. Of course, the reverse is also true. Many of the things that I value also make no sense at all to others. Yet, for the most part, we can each do what we prefer without too much strain on each other. Of course, there will be conflicts between hikers who want to preserve wilderness and miners who want to strip it for the coal or gold. What can prevent the anarchy that some worry about? One answer is that there are some values that can benefit everyone, while respecting the other different values that people have. Agreement on a small number of these should be enough to bind society together sufficiently to prevent anarchy. For instance, honesty benefits everyone except those who cheat. Think how much richer we would all be if we could take all the money that is spent on locks, keys, and security of all kinds and spend that money in ways that would benefit us much more directly. Likewise, the idea of freedom on which our country is based allows people to follow their values, limited only by the right of others to follow theirs. The rule of law, cumbersome and unfair as it often is, sets up ways to resolve disputes between people, an alternative to violence. Even as flawed and biased as the law is, it is usually preferable to dueling, feuding or war. Hopefully the law will evolve to be fairer in protecting everyone's freedoms, rather than primarily only those of the rich and powerful. These key kinds of values are more general categories of values at higher logical levels, ways of unifying and supporting other more specific values that differ. Working together, different people with different values can discover how to create a balanced ecosystem of values that will allow the fully development of human beings in a variety of ways. Humanity's capacity for cooperation is considerable, and although this is most evident when used to make war, there is no reason that it could not be used to find non-violent solutions to differences and conflicts. Summary. Values are categories of experiences that satisfy our needs or desires. Perceptual feelings provide factual information about the world outside and inside our bodies, while evaluative feelings of liking and disliking give us feedback information about the importance of these events to us. Evaluative feelings are the ultimate criteria for values, letting us know when things are going well and alerting us to when things are not going well, and that some change needs to be made. Most therapy and personal change has been directed toward changing unpleasant evaluative feelings directly, rather than at changing the situation that elicits these feelings. Since evaluative feelings are always at a higher logical level than the situation that elicits them, this is an example of attempting to work at the wrong logical level. State is an ambiguous term that can indicate someone's feeling or emotional state, or it can also include a larger scope of their perceptions, thinking, and behavior. Dividing a state into smaller components, modalities, and submodalities allows us to make finer discriminations and be more specific about exactly what someone experiences. This specifically allows us to change much smaller scopes of an experience, which is much easier and also offers many more alternative ways to change a problem state. In contrast, metastating applies one poorly defined state to another, compounding the ambiguity and confusion in the term state. A numerical rating of the intensity of a feeling response is useful as feedback about how well an intervention is working to change the event that elicits those feelings. However, this intensity of an evaluative feeling is irrelevant to choosing a resource, and a resource in one situation can be totally useless or harmful to another. Values conflicts arise from many different sources. In a given situation, we often find that we can't satisfy different values, no matter what we do. A value in present time will often oppose a value in the future. The values expressed by our physiology are often in conflict with social values, and those social values are themselves sometimes inconsistent and contradictory. Even when we review and organize our values into a consistent hierarchy of importance, that often means that some values take precedence over others, which are ignored at least temporarily. Many traditional societies have authoritatively set forth that they call objective values, based either on historical practice or on the revelations of prophets and sacred texts. Unfortunately, the objective values of one society are often in conflict with the objective values of another, so there must be something subjective about them. Since objective knowledge in science and mathematics does not exist, it is unlikely that objectivity in values is possible. Nevertheless, an alternative to totalitarian authority exists in our species' shared physiological needs, our desire for freedom, and our considerable capacity to have compassion for each other and cooperate with each other. These shared values can be the basis for discovering how we can live together while respecting our considerable differences. Western societies are moving very slowly in that direction, while the remnants of previous authoritarian political and religious doctrines are attempting to pull society backwards. Next, we will explore how it is useful to organize experiences into a hierarchy of relative importance, so that we can attend to what is more important, and how this can be used to consider in adjusting those relationships when they lead to consequences that are problematic. Although values can be put into a hierarchy of attention and importance, this hierarchy is not a rigid and unchanging structure, but one that changes over time in response to changing events, both outside our body and inside us. Action may not always bring happiness, but there is no happiness without action. Benjamin Disraeli. What a wise man, this Benjamin Disraeli. Chapter 10: Hierarchy and Heterarchy. Dynamic balance. Two dangers threaten the world: order and disorder. Paul Valery. When faced with a decision, it makes sense to do what is most important to you, or choose the alternative that will best satisfy more of your needs or wishes. That presupposes that you have some way of knowing that is most important to you, to knowing what is most important to you, or what is best for you. In order to do that, you have to have different experiences arranged in some kind of hierarchy of importance. Some people don't have a clear hierarchy, so they often make choices that don't really satisfy their more important needs and desires. Others have a hierarchy that is inaccurate, so they consistently make choices that result in frustration and pain. Hierarchy is a word with several different meanings, and many of them are often presupposed or poorly understood. In this chapter, we will start with the simplest kind of hierarchy of categorization. Then we will go on to show how a special kind of criterion can be added to a simple hierarchy to create one that also includes importance or control. In Chapter 5, I gave a simple example of classifying a group of children's blocks into different categories using the principle of categorical inclusion, and how that resulted in logical levels of categorization. First, the blocks were divided into 3 categories of blocks based on color: red, white, and blue. Then, each of these 3 groups was divided into 3 more specific categories based on the 3 different shapes: square, triangular, and circular. Squaregular, triangular, and circular. This is better. Then each of these 9 categories were subdivided into 3 more specific categories based on the 3 different heights, creating what is often called a taxonomy. This can be represented by the tree structure diagram below, using S for square, T for triangular, and C for circular. We are presented with beautiful diagram. Very beautiful diagram we are presented with. Blocks red, white, blue, STC, 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 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Previously, we used this example to illustrate principles of categorical inclusion. Now, I want to use the same example to examine the resulting hierarchy, which was implicit in that example, but not discussed earlier. In the diagram above, we used color as the first criterion for dividing the blocks into subcategories, followed by shape and then height. That puts color at the top of the hierarchy and height at the bottom. Because of the physiology and neurology of our senses, we attend to some categories of experience more easily than others. Since color attracts our attention strongly, it is more natural for us to start the hierarchy of blocks using color rather than height or shape. However, we could have used height or shape as the first criterion, creating a very different hierarchy, with height or shape at the top. Then we could have used shape or height as the second criterion, putting color at the bottom of the hierarchy. The order that we use to apply criteria to subdivide a group of things or events into subcategories is much more arbitrary than most people realize, and the resulting hierarchy is equally arbitrary. Although we may find certain sequences and resulting hierarchies more natural, intuitive, or useful, they are always a result of our way of organizing experience. It is not something that exists independently in the world, as the classical philosophers thought, and as some spiritual or occult beliefs assume. As classical philosophers thought, and as some spiritual or occult beliefs assume. I would say that this sentence reflects how Steve feels about philosophers, classical philosophers, and occultists. Occultists assume, but philosophers think. When we think of a logical hierarchy, we often think of the more general categories at the top as being more important or significant, as when people speak of higher logical levels or neurological levels controlling lower levels. However, since we can create very different hierarchies simply by using the same criteria or different ones in a different sequence, it is evident that the higher levels in this kind of categorization are simply more general and less specific, not necessarily more important or controlling. Correcto. The simplest way to create a category is to use the sensory-based properties of things, their color, shape, height, etc., as in the example of the painted wooden blocks. However, there are many other kinds of similarity. To name only a few, we can create a category of things that exist for a short time, events that occurred in a certain location or time of day, things whose names begin with a small letter, etc. These categories are not based on observable properties of the members of the category themselves. Create category of things that exist for short time, events that occurred in a certain location, things whose names begin with. These categories are not based on the observable properties of the members of the category themselves. Yeah, great. A descriptive criterion simply specifies what properties or qualities a member of a category must have, and by inheritability, what any subcategory of that category must also have. No matter what descriptive criteria we use, this does not create a hierarchy of control or importance. The common idea that higher levels are always more important or controlling, high-level abstractions control lower-level ideas, representations and understandings, is inappropriate overgeneralization that is only sometimes true. Yet, some hierarchies do exhibit relative control or importance, so this must result from some additional factor. Relational criteria specify how the members of category relate in some way to other things and events. For instance, the category woman or worker is descriptive, but wife or supervisor is relational, because it specifies a relationship with someone else. Relational criteria can be very explicit and overt, as in military organization or in the job descriptions and organizational chart in a businesses. Even though a family seldom has an explicit organization chart, there may be a hierarchy of importance or control that is just as specific, but expressed non